I'm calling this segment HELOCs for Dummies. And the reason I'm doing that is because, I got a couple of inquiries just this week from folks considering a HELOC. They had a lot of questions, and what it got me to realize is that despite the fact that HELOCs are very popular, they're probably the primary go-to choice for pulling equity out of your home without refinancing your first mortgage. But yet, despite all that, you would think that the product is well known, everyone understands how they work. And what I find quite often is that it's not really the case. The product is considered a little bit complex, and it can be hard for some consumers to understand how that works. So I want to review that with you here real quick, because it's really a lot simpler than you might think. The first thing to understand about a HELOC, it's a second mortgage. Many times I've had conversations with homeowners who are looking to get a HELOC, and they'll make a comment to me something along the lines of, I'm interested in a HELOC. I don't want a second mortgage. I just want to get a HELOC. And of course, I have to point out to them, no, understand that a HELOC is a second mortgage. It's or what we more technically would call a junior mortgage lien. So when you get a HELOC, when you get this line of credit, it is secured by your home as an additional mortgage lien. And by the way, HELOCs usually are going to be in second position. In some cases, a HELOC can be arranged for someone who owns a home free and clear. And it can be a first lien, like a first mortgage in position on that home. So HELOC can be in first position. Most commonly, they are a second mortgage in second position behind the first mortgage that was recorded earlier. And in some cases, you can get HELOCs in third position. Yes, believe it or not, it is possible with some lenders to get a HELOC in third position behind maybe an existing first mortgage, an existing second that is a HELOC, and then get an additional HELOC. So that is possible, believe it or not. But in terms of HELOCs, what I tell people, the simplest way to understand how they work, at least mostly in part, is think of a HELOC as it's a credit card attached to your home. In fact, I was going to call this segment, what? HELOC? Isn't that like getting a credit card to pay off your credit cards? But the point of it is that a HELOC, in terms of how it works, it's very much like a credit card, but it's secured by your home. Which, by the way, that's part of the reason those HELOCs are going to have a rate much lower than your credit cards. Because remember, credit cards are unsecured loans. A HELOC is secured by your home. That creates more safety for the lender. That helps bring that yield down on a HELOC versus having a credit card loan that's not secured by real property. Now, the other thing about a HELOC, it's a variable rate loan. Now, that spooks people. Yes, the loan adjusts. So it's like an ARM loan, an adjustable rate mortgage on your, if you have a first mortgage. So a variable rate loan is what a HELOC is. So that does spook people. And then further, what really is confusing is, given that it's a variable rate loan, it does not adjust on a scheduled basis. A first mortgage, adjustable rate loan or variable rate loan is going to typically have a fixed rate and payment for 3 years or 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. And then after that fixed period, it's going to adjust once a year or maybe once every 6 months. HELOCs don't work that way. A HELOC will adjust, but you don't know when. Why? Because the HELOC only adjusts when the Fed, like yesterday, changes up or down the Fed funds rate. So as a consequence, you don't have the peace of mind of knowing what the future schedule of adjustments are going to be. You're completely at the mercy of the Fed and what their decisions they make each time they have a meeting, which is generally about once a month, not quite, but pretty close to that. So just understand it is a variable rate loan, but it does not adjust on a scheduled basis. It only adjusts when the Fed changes the Fed funds rate, and the Fed funds rate does directly correlate to a HELOC. Now, in terms of adjustments, a HELOC does not have any caps on the adjustments, the individual adjustments. It only has a life cap of 18%. So again, each time the Fed changes the Fed funds rate, your HELOC rate is going to adjust immediately by the same amount. There is no cap on that increase. So if the Fed decided to raise the Fed funds rate 1% all in one fell swoop, your HELOC would go up by that amount at the exact, immediately. So just keep that in mind. Although, frankly, that kind of increase that large is extremely rare. In fact, I'm not even sure I can recall it ever happening. So just be aware of that. And of course, you do have the 18% life cap. Now, a HELOC rate is set by an index. It's an interest rate that the loan is based on. In this case, the most common index for a HELOC is the prime rate. It used to be called the commercial bank prime rate. Now it's more technically called the weekly average prime rate. It's basically the prime rate that banks offer to their prime customers. So prime directly correlates to the Fed funds rate. Whenever the Fed funds rate changes, prime changes. So most HELOCs are tied to prime, and then there'll be a margin over that prime index number. Now, right now, as a result of what the Fed did yesterday, the prime rate's at 8.5. Most HELOCs will have a margin ranging from anywhere from 0.74 to a couple of percent, or even higher if you have lower credit scores and maybe a higher loan to value. So effectively, that means that HELOCs right now are running somewhere in the range of, say, 9.5 to 11% or more, again, depending on your credit score and loan to value. So that's how the rate is set. You've got the prime rate, you've got your margin. Whenever the prime rate changes because of the Fed changing the Fed funds rate, that's when your HELOC rate's going to change. And by the way, that's exactly how credit cards work. Credit cards are typically tied to prime. And so they have a margin over prime too, but the margin's much higher because it's an unsecured loan, not secured by your home. Now, once you get the loan, there are 2 periods in your HELOC. The first period is called the draw period. That draw period typically is going to be for 10 years. During that 10-year period, it's important to know, what does that mean? Well, during the 10-year period, the first feature is the minimum payment required on the loan every month is interest only. You don't have to pay any principal. The minimum payment is only interest. And by the way, it's based on the outstanding balance. That's a key thing to understand, key distinction over, say, a first mortgage. Your minimum monthly payment is going to be based on the outstanding balance at every month. And the minimum that you have to pay is only interest. You do not have to pay any principal. Now, if you choose to pay down the principal, which I recommend you do, that drops the balance. As that drops the balance, then your required payment the following month goes down immediately. Why? Because, again, that monthly payment is based on the outstanding balance. So it's important, it's to your benefit to pay extra than that interest-only minimum, get that balance down, because that's going to reduce your required payment the next month. Plus, it frees up some of the credit line to use again. And by the way, if you take it all the way to the extreme, you draw out a bunch of money, you pay it down quickly, maybe you pay it back down to zero, there's no payment. Why? No balance, no monthly payment. Again, just like a credit card. You pay off your credit card, that doesn't mean your account's closed unless you ask for it to be closed. That just means you got no balance and you don't have to make a payment because there's no balance to pay a payment from. HELOC works exactly the same way. Now, what happens after 10 years? Well, after 10 years, we then have what's called the repayment period. Now, the repayment period in most cases is going to be a period of an additional 20 years. So that in reality, this is a 30-year loan. You've got your 10-year draw period, then your 20-year repayment period. So what happens at that beginning of that 20-year period, which starts the first month, January of January in the 11th year, or whatever month you got the loan, starting the 11th year, what happens? Well, the interest-only payment feature goes away. You can no longer make interest-only payments. You can no longer draw against the HELOC if you have some unused credit available. You can't draw against that anymore. It's closed. So then what they do is they take that remaining balance and they amortize that over an additional 20 years so that it's paid off in full at that 20-year, at the end of that 20-year period. So if you've got that HELOC maxed out, when you hit that year 11, again, you can't make interest only anymore. You can't draw against it. Of course, you've already maxed it out anyway, so there's no available credit to draw from. Again, just like a credit card. And you've got to take that fully drawn out balance, amortize it over 20 years to pay it off. That's going to mean a pretty healthy jump in your required monthly payment. So that's another incentive to try to pay that balance down before you get to that start of the 11th year, where that repayment period can be pretty challenging maybe in your monthly payment if it's fully maxed out. So hopefully that'll eliminate some of the mystery and confusion and complexity of how a HELOC works. Again, it's pretty simple when you think about it. Think in terms of a credit card. It works very much in the same way, but again, it's secured by your home as a junior lien, most likely a second mortgage. Okay, so hopefully that helps. And again, with HELOCs, I'll tell you, one thing I'll suggest is it's a great opportunity to pay off revolving credit card debt. I would say that's probably, if not the number one, probably the number two reason people get HELOCs. Because after all, even though it operates like a credit card, you can still have an opportunity to get rid of that 22 to 25% credit card debt, get your rate down hopefully to somewhere in the 9.5, 10, 11% range. That's a huge reduction in interest cost. But I always counsel homeowners, you got to kind of change your behavior if you're going to do the HELOC to get rid of that revolving debt. You want to change your behavior to avoid running up that revolving debt again, because then you can end up using all that equity, having paid it off the first time, and then be back in the same boat. And so you want to kind of look at your spending habits, figure out how to avoid that large amount of revolving debt in the future. Understand your HELOC is sort of the same type of instrument, and that there is some incentive to pay it down. And then to the extent you have unused credit, that's there for a rainy day if you need cash in an emergency. So keep that in mind when you're contemplating HELOC. It's still a great product. I encourage anybody who's has a heavy situation in terms of revolving credit card debt, take a look at this as an option to get that interest cost down. Thanks everybody for watching, and just remember, at MortgageWorks we have the answers and they're on the house.